whatever time of day it is. Thank you for tuning in to Conversations with Dr. Don. Boy, have I got a show for you this evening. Yes, sirree, Bob, really. My guests are two political activists, kinds of interesting human beings, and that's as much as I'll say about that right now, because they'll tell you who they are after I introduce them. To my left here is Greg Kafuri, who's been on the show before, and it was a delight to have him then. And to my right is Lloyd Marbett. And for those of you who are not local, you should hear about these names eventually on the national level. You'll see what I mean again, and I'm teasing you. Thinking how we would do this show so that it is not too spontaneous, because either one of these guys can talk for 3 hours about critically important stuff and have fun along the way. So I kind of prepared a sort of an outline to guide us so that we can cover what I think is important to cover, and they agreed that a lot of it will work. That's a good start, Greg. So the first part of my show is typically, as you know, are what I call a bio segment, where you get to appreciate who my guests are personally enough to get an idea where they're coming from when they have views and opinions and comments about things we'll be talking about. Nothing heavy duty, because I'm a psychologist, as you know, and I'm not going to do any head shrinking on this show tonight, because they might turn the tables on me. And they're both capable of doing it too. So let's start off. Okay, for your first-time viewers, Conversations with Dr. Don is an ongoing series of 1-hour standalone talk shows where I interview interesting people like most of you out there about who they are as unique, one-of-a-kind individuals, and about what it is that they want to talk about. And we'll talk about, I mentioned that already before. So I'm going to invite you to tell me about anything that's happened in the last 24 hours that aroused a particular feeling in you that may be worth sharing with the viewing audience. I think we talked before the camera started rolling about some sort of a new act by the federal government that will have us all in concentration camps if we don't resist or fight back. So this made me very angry, and I'm kind of holding that. And this is what stirred me in the last 24 hours. So how about you, Greg? Is anything causing any particular feeling?
Well, I think Lloyd better get into the concentration camps first. Once you raise a subject like that, you can't let it go.
I want to join the founding fathers.
Yeah.
Let me tell you.
So all right. So let's go with the.
Well, let's make sure that our audience understands what we're talking about here.
Yes.
There is a bill in the House of Representatives. It passed the House of Representatives. It's H.R. 1955. I think it's very interesting that it has 1955 attached to it. The title of this bill is the Prevention of Violent Radicalization and Homegrown Terrorism Act. Now, imagine if this act had been in place, probably was, at the time the old founding fathers were trying to free the country. I mean, anyway, what's going on here is yet another effort to revitalize the House Committee on Un-American Activities. That's basically what's going on.
Yes.
And it's just amazing to me that well, what's most amazing to me is the result of the vote in the House. 404 for it against 6. You want to know what's wrong with the Democrats and the Republicans? There it is. They're all in bed with each other. They all seem to enjoy using this fear of terrorism to roll this kind of crap out, which is basically destroying our country.
Are you implying there's no difference between the two parties?
I've felt for a long time that there was no difference between.
Well, the elements of this are really interesting. They plan on having hearings around the country with subpoena power and dragging people in and questioning them about their political beliefs.
Right.
And you know, you have these grandstanding congressmen and so on. And at the same time, actually, it sounds like you know, one of Lloyd's paranoid fantasy dreams. But they're
Greg, it's a revisit of what happened to us at Trojan. Remember when we were chained together in front of the judge?
Trojan is a nuclear power plant here in Oregon.
It would be an honor to join you again. I just hope this is not going to happen.
Well, what these guys, there actually are facilities being prepared for mass detention, and Halliburton
building them
has the contract. So you know, they're not just whistling Dixie.
No. No,
So we're getting ahead of ourselves now.
Sure.
Let's go back a little bit to where we were going, because I want my viewing audience to know a little more about you guys, because maybe they didn't see the earlier shows when you were on. So I have a question here that says, who, what, and why were you yesterday? Who, what, and why are you today? And who, what, and why will you be tomorrow? So any of those you want to handle?
Well,
so
I
people get
would
who
think
you
it'd be
are?
easy to just jump to it quite quick.
Okay.
Greg is an activist lawyer.
Yes.
I'm an activist client.
And I'm an activist, whatever. Progressive, leftist, old-fashioned liberal activist as best I can.
Well,
Greg and I go way back.
I'll tell you about Lloyd. Lloyd came here at 19, and he'd had a smattering of college. He just left the Navy during Vietnam, and he read a book called The Powers of the Peaceful Atom. Perils of the Peaceful Atom, and he decided that he wanted to get to know more about the subject. And there were the beginnings of licensing hearings for new nuclear plants that were going on, and so he got the rule book and went there and asked if he could participate. And people laughed at him. That you had this room full of suits, all these lawyers and officers of the great utilities and BPA and everybody, and they're sitting around in a room planning the nuclear future for the Northwest, and saying that there were going to be 20 nuclear plants in Oregon by today, by 2000 actually, and Lloyd said, well, it says here in the book that a citizen, in the rule book, that a citizen can petition to be a party, an intervener, and have the powers of a party, and they reluctantly agreed that appeared to be true, and they kind of snickered, and this big hippie wants to come in and pretend he knows something.
Read from books.
Yeah, it'll.
Nothing's changed, by the way.
Yes, it's gonna provide some amusement for them, and 25 years later, Lloyd was the last man standing, and then there were nuclear plants all over Washington, half built and abandoned. Trojan was shut down largely through Lloyd's efforts, which I helped some with. And that's a pretty remarkable history.
Way back,
and we run into each other on the street, I think, is where I can't remember how we first met. I mean, it's been so long ago.
It's been
and
a while.
you and I have traveled together a long distance. An activist attorney, a man who was involved in the early civil rights struggle in the South. I guess it's a mutual admiration society that we have here.
And it's still going on.
Absolutely.
So this was resisting nuclear plants all over the countryside.
No, that's an irony. One of the things that always amazed me about the anti-nuclear movement is that it was not a national movement in the sense that it was nationally organized. It was a bunch of little people, each in their own communities, trying to, stand up to the monolithic giant, the Atomic Energy Commission, the whatever state licensing proceedings that came up, and basically redirect the whole movement towards nuclear power, which was going on. I mean, in the Pacific Northwest, they were talking about 20 nuclear plants. I mean, they had the big hydrothermal program that they in fact, they changed the whole flow of the Columbia River to accommodate this hydrothermal program. And of course, today all we have is a remnant of that is the one reactor at Hanford.
So why are you anti-nuclear? Because our president seems to think it's a wonderful idea that we have nuclear energy to replace carbon-based energy sources.
Well, the amazing thing about it is that after all these years, the Perils of the Peaceful Atom is out of print. You probably couldn't even find a copy if you wanted to. But the amazing thing is that all of the problems that were identified in the nuclear fuel cycle are still with us today. The waste doesn't have any place to go. We still don't know what a safe level of radiation exposure is. There's always the problem of accidents. And even more amazing, in a time of terrorism, which the Republicans ride like a big horse, why would you want to build targets? Looking back at what happened in 9/11, apparently one of the original targets that they were looking at was a nuclear power plant, I believe, in New York City.
Sure.
So, it floors me that we would continue to play with this technology.
And I don't think it's any secret that the terrorists can figure out that while they're building these giant domes to contain the reactor, the spent fuel pools have 10, 15, 20 times as much radioactive waste, and they could be taken out you know, with a couple of goofs.
Okay, let's back up a bit here, because I want the audience to know a little more about how it is you're talking about the way you're talking. How did you arrive at this position in your life where you started taking on the nuclear people and you call yourself a radical? How is it that you got to be the way you are today?
The Vietnam War.
Vietnam War.
Yeah,
and,
absolutely.
And what was it about the Vietnam War that caused you to turn out the way you are now?
Well, it was going there, for one.
Yes.
And it was, you know, discovering the greatest disillusionment of all, that your own government was suspect and part of a great distortion and lie, which we still participate in. Iraq is just Vietnam all over again. I mean, there's no, the similarities are so striking. It's unreal, and you know, we don't seem to be able to pull ourselves out of this, which is most unfortunate, because I'm not certain how much time we've got left.
When you first went to Vietnam, were you aware that this was a wrong situation?
No. I was a nice white Anglo-Saxon Protestant. Yeah. You know, I actually enjoyed boot camp. You know, and probably should have stayed there, but. But once I got there, it woke me up. Now I'm not a frontline war hero. I was my father took me down and joined me up in the Navy. Literally, my father did take me down and join me up in the Navy. And he did me a favor ultimately, because 2 months after I was joined into the Navy, you know, the draft notice arrived, and of course at that point it was too late to pull me into the Army. And I don't think I ever would have gotten out of the Army the way I got out of the Navy, which was as I basically quit. Once I saw what was going on, I just decided I couldn't do it.
Well, it was even a little more serious than that. Lloyd was with a bunch of guys who said, we're not going. And they came in and said, okay, you know, this is your last chance.
There was a little bit of mutiny on the ship.
You guys are going to go to Leavenworth, and you're going to break rocks until you're old and gray. And the guys held together. And they finally said, oh, to hell with them, just get them out of here.
Yeah, and that's what they did. They just rolled us out.
So you've been resisting unreasonable, illegal, immoral authority all your life now, since that time?
Well, you know, listen, I'm not, Greg brought up The Perils of the Peaceful Atom, and there's an amazing story about that book, for my life anyway. When I had been going to the library, I'd just come out to Oregon. I was going to the library trying to find out, you know, the answers to all the problems that were in the world. You know, why do we have this war in Vietnam? I figured it had to be psychology. And I was living at the time with a wonderful woman who was pregnant with our daughter, and she was also going to the library, and she picked up this book, Perils of the Peaceful Atom, and she read the book, and she says, listen, you ought to read this book. So she gives the book to me. I read the book. I get about halfway into the book, and I, at that point, knew nothing about nuclear power. But I'm, you know, they're talking about all the problems with the nuclear fuel cycle. I'm about 6 or 7 chapters into the book, and it's suddenly dawning on me that I'm in the process of bringing another life onto the planet. They're building this nuclear plant on the outskirts of town, the Trojan plant. I remember vividly sitting in the kitchen, getting to the end of that chapter, looking up to Diane and saying, you know, Diane, if they operate the Trojan plant, I think we should go to Canada. Wow. I mean, that's what you know, and that was kind of like my mindset too. I'm not a hero. I mean, at that point, I just didn't see any way of confronting this, and I wanted to get away from it. So I turned the page over to the next chapter, and the title of the next chapter was, Don't Bother Running.
So your awareness,
my awareness, that's right, because at that point, I read that chapter, and it suddenly occurred to me that, you know, we were living on a round planet that, you know, an enclosed life support system, and there was no place left to run. And so the only thing I can say is that if I was to equate myself with anything, I was no different than a rat that was cornered. I suddenly realized that there was no place to run. And so at that point, I had to do something. And so now I wanted to educate myself about the nuclear fuel cycle, and that's what led to this long, amazing journey that I have participated in with Greg and others in an effort to try and, do something about this problem. And we're here now confronting this problem all over again. I mean, I want to talk about this book at some point.
In a minute, but let me go to Greg here and let me ask you, how did you come to be the way you are in this radical, how would you define yourself?
Well,
what would you call yourself?
Radical is...
progressive or what?
I think that anybody who comes to see the world the way I do would want to do the kinds of things that I do. I mean, it's not an emotional thing where one wants to be cutting edge or on the barricades or anything. It flows from the analysis of what's wrong. And when I was 18, I was in a construction camp working. I just got out of high school in Alaska, central Alaska, and we would get the paper every few days, on the train.
Alaska.
Yeah, central Alaska. And it was like Portland. It rained every day. One day there was the big headline story about Schwerner and Cheney and Goodman, the civil rights workers in Mississippi, who were murdered. And
because
it was
of the civil rights activities.
Yeah, it was an enormous event. And I remember thinking, I've always thought that there was nobody my age who was out doing more important things than I was. I never had the feeling I was falling behind my peers. And all of a sudden I said, geez, here these guys are, doing the most important work on the planet, and they're my age, and I'm sitting here swatting mosquitoes. So I resolved to go, and the next year I went down to the South with Dr. King's group and had a remarkable summer, preached at black churches, and that probably ruined me as a lawyer because you get in there and these people it's hot and they're fanning themselves, and everybody, this is the action, the only action they get all week is in church. And so the ministers, they come up and, man, they bring the house down. And then when they're done, they say, now one of our civil rights workers, Brother Greg, is here, and he's going to be talking to you about the coming of the freedom. And you step up there, and they're expecting something, They don't want you to read a schedule. So I quickly became an overactor, which...
an overactor?
Yeah, which crippled me for the first 17 years of my law practice. I didn't win a case worth calling my mother and telling her about.
There was a long time. It was a long time.
Really? Yeah. And because of your civil rights activities.
Well, I'm being somewhat facetious,
of course.
But it's well, seriously, when I would have a jury in front of me, I wouldn't simply want to do what I could do to get their votes. I wanted their hearts and their souls, and I wanted them to view the world the way I did. And so I was constantly overreaching, and I got preachy and self-righteous and all these things. But unlike Lloyd, I got over it.
Okay.
Yeah, I still language for Greg. It's amazing.
You got to be aware these little ones that slip into each other,
what's really interesting is Greg's talking. I'm thinking of that Crosby, Stills and Nash song, Chicago, Won't You Please Come to Chicago. It was kind of like
Show your face.
That time was, the message was out there, and it's for whatever reason, it pulled us together.
Absolutely.
So then what was going on then was critical, and I'm gathering from our earlier conversation what's going on today in the world, in our country, is critical too.
Oh God, it's numbing.
Yeah, but it's the culture sure is different. I mean, at that time, Lloyd's right. There was a great gathering in the 60s and early 70s of a new tribalism of people coming to the same view of what was the matter, what needed to be done, coming together, joining in small groups, linking up, and doing things. And nowadays, there are not a lot of people actually doing things anymore.
Why is that?
I think there are people that want to do things. I think the thing that is so difficult is how overwhelming the last 8 years have been.
Yeah.
I have felt it. I mean, it is felt overwhelming. Just this all-pervasive fascism, oppression.
The 8 years before that were no joke.
No,
either,
I know. It was all leading up to this reality that we're in. Yes.
But now we're
and that's amazing too, because it's like when Reagan came along, I said to myself, God, I never thought there could be anybody that would make Nixon look good.
Right.
You know, and now we got somebody that makes Reagan look good.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, you know, in this book about nuclear weapons, Reagan ultimately came to the position that he wanted to abolish nuclear weapons. I mean, the man we got in here now is starting the arms race up and has started
He's
the arms race
trying
up.
to find enemies anywhere he can.
Exactly.
Why is he doing that?
He's nuts.
I think so too.
No,
I really do.
I think he's a very weak person, and I think he's very small-minded. I think he's driven by petty vanities, jealousies, bitternesses. You know, chewing over old grudges like an old dog chews on a bone. You know, he's got family issues. All these things that work on him. It makes him
now he's somebody.
well, yeah, capable of great hostility, you know, and harm, and at the same time, a guy relatively easily influenced by powerful figures who are close to him.
Yes.
And that's where Dick
And I
Cheney
think
comes
it's
in, who's
true.
a genuinely sinister character and is surrounded by some very sinister
Yes, and
characters.
if we don't impeach these people, I rue where our country will be once the next executive comes in. Regardless how good they are, these men have set a precedent which needs to be turned around, and it's incumbent upon Congress to put a stop to this. That's what they are there for.
Well, and
they're not doing
Congress
it.
putting a stop to it?
I know.
What?
Which is the
Congress now
disappointment of the
just
last
passed.
election.
You were talking about this
I
act.
know. They just passed this
So what-
prevention. I know.
What do we need to do? What do we need to do? Just sit here and talk about it, or what?
well, one thing. There have been questionnaires sent to all the presidential candidates, asking their view of presidential power. You know, does the president have the right to
Executive power.
invade countries that haven't attacked us? And it's a lengthy questionnaire, and most of them have answered it, and it's gotten almost no attention at all.
Right.
You know, that would be a
Well,
place
that's
to
the other
start.
thing. That's I mean, what you know, the media coverage of this campaign is just atrocious. I mean, we're not talking
It's
the
all
issues.
horse race.
And if we were talking the issues, Edwards would not look so isolated as he is.
Sure.
I mean, because it would be incumbent upon the media to make sure that everybody answered those questions across the board.
I'll tell you a story. Back in
I want you to hold that because my director's yelling at me
is it
that
time
we
for a
got to
commercial?
take a commercial break here, and we'll go right back to that in a minute.
I
Okay.
didn't know you were doing commercials.
Now hold on, let me do my little announcement here. Oh, shut up. Time for a break. Before we go to a break, I want to say a few things, and then we'll show you our broadcast schedule in a moment or so. For you viewers who live in the Washington County part of the Portland, Oregon metro area, Conversations with Dr. Don shows are broadcast 5 times each week. Typically, a news show is first aired on a Tuesday on Channel 11 and is rebroadcast on the following Friday through Monday on other channels. Broadcast dates, times, and stations for you viewers will be up on the screen in a moment. Now, there's been a slight change in what you're seeing on the screen in a moment. It may not be exactly what I'm saying, but what's on the screen is accurate, okay? Before we show you the local broadcast schedule, I want to tell you local viewers about my quarterly live call-in show. About every 3 months or so, we have a live on-air call-in show for Portland, Oregon metro area viewers. The next live call-in show will be January 31st. That's a lively thing. When you call in and you get to talk to me and my guests about what we're talking about at that moment. It's always pretty exciting. So let's put up the regular playback schedule for the Dr. Don shows. Can we put that on the screen now, please? Well, we're back, and thank you for hanging in there. I hope you had a good drink of water while we had a little break here. And while the cameras were off, we were chatting about what we will talk about in the second half of this show. And we talked about important stuff going on now in a way that you got a little idea about who these characters are and why they think the way that they do. And I admire both of you.
Thank you, Dr.
For yes, I really admire what you're about. So the title of the show is the 2008 presidential race. And so let's talk a little about the presidential race so that the audience can get an idea what your opinion was about what happened in Iowa and what happened in New Hampshire, and get some idea of your thinking and feeling about the candidates right now. So who's going to start talking about that?
I'll start. I went to Iowa with my wife for the last week of the campaign, and it was very cold in Iowa.
I bet.
Except for election night when it got warm and everybody came out. The most interesting thing about it to me was that John Edwards was a unique presidential candidate. All the candidates for years and years and years, they talk about, well, we need to do something about jobs and health care and you know, the environment, this list of, you know, the failures of American policy. As someone said recently, the national government of the United States hasn't solved a problem in the last 40 years. And
wow, that's powerful.
But what Edwards did, and what none of the others have done, is he said, there's a common thread to all that's wrong. There's a central reason why things don't work, and that is that the corporations control Washington. We have the corporate domination of Washington. The citizens are not welcome, basically. The lobbyists run the show. They write the legislation. They pay for the campaigns, and so the corporations, which have their very narrow interests, you know, make more money next quarter, are dictating policy, and what the long-term interests of the people are not served at all. And
so the interests of the corporation are served.
Right. So which are not our interests. You know, I mean, the interests of the corporations are to throw their costs out the window, you know, into the stream. Instead of getting rid of your waste, you throw it in the stream or throw it in the dirt, dump it into the air. That saves you money. That's a corporate interest. Driving down wages, that's a corporate interest. You know, sending jobs overseas, where you have to pay your workers less. That's a corporate interest. Using that threat to bully your workers at home to give backs instead of doing better every year. That's a corporate interest. And none of these things have anything to do with our welfare except to degrade it. And Edwards made the argument. He said that's the central problem, and that's why I went there for him. He's not a perfect guy, but nobody is. But the news coverage, when he wasn't on the actual talk shows and talking himself, you never saw coverage of his message.
Those kinds of things.
And you never saw coverage really of anybody else's message.
The media is part of the corporate dominance.
Well, no kidding. I mean, you've got the networks are owned by, you know, defense contractors, nuclear energy contractors. These are not nice guys. And the other thing that struck me in the last few weeks, in terms of coverage and impact on the race, aside from how they minimized Edwards, they talked about a two-person race in Iowa between Obama and Hillary, and they would barely mention Edwards, even though it was a three-way tie in the polls for months, literally. But they marginalized this guy deliberately. Then he came in second. They still marginalized him in New Hampshire.
Right.
And the night before the election, Hillary had that scene where she got dewy-eyed and talked about how she loves America and how sorry she felt for America because it looked like America wasn't going to pick her. And that ran...
The weepy factor.
Oh, that ran for, I'm sure it was a full minute on all the networks, all the local shows. It ran over and over on cable in New Hampshire in the last 24 hours. And the amazing thing about that is, what's the last time you heard a presidential candidate say more than 6 words on the evening news? And the answer is, it's been decades. Back in 1968, the average news clip of a presidential candidate talking was like 48 seconds long. And now it's down to 3 or 4 seconds. We need change. Cut. I'm serious. Count them yourself. It's that bad.
So the media is part of, or instrumental
the media is
in
the problem. It's not.
Why is the media this way?
Well, the media is this way because Madison Avenue has succeeded in understanding what it takes to manipulate people into doing what is not in their best interest.
Now wait a minute. Americans aren't stupid, you know. Can they be manipulated? I'm being.
Well, you're being facetious, obviously. Americans are manipulated, and it's not because they want to be, it's because literally they're bombarded all the time. They know no better.
Go around the country and look at the newspapers in relatively major cities, cities of 500,000, 600,000, 1 million people. Look at the newspapers and you'd be astonished how bad they are. The Oregonian looks terrific by comparison. You'll see a front page, you turn to page 2, and it's got all the major news stories in the world, and they're all this big. They're summarized.
And look at this brouhaha in the FCC allowing newspapers now to own television stations. It's all going in that direction. Concentration into the hands of the few. The very few that are at the cream, the top, who rake in
where all the money's going.
Right.
The growth in the American economy in the last 20 years, something like half of it, has gone to the top 0.5%.
Right.
So you've got this tiny sliver of people that's hiring other people to watch their yachts.
Read David K. Johnson's book, Free Lunch. I'm in it right now. It's amazing. It's just part of that revelation.
So then the media, I heard on Tom Hartman's show, and Tom Hartman.
Yeah, Tom Hartman, and he's written an excellent book on this whole thing.
Yes, Tom Hartman on AM radio. He's excellent. He's one of my favorite people to listen to. He's one of the few people I admire nowadays who's really a progressive, who's very brilliant. Okay. So he had a guest on, and they talked about the military-industrial media complex. It's a different take on Eisenhower's media-industrial complex.
Think of this. Think of this.
Powerful.
When Eisenhower left office, he gave that great final speech, and he said, "Beware of the military-industrial complex. We're developing this giant military complex that's industrial complex that's linked to military production, and these guys are working hand in glove, and they're going to take over the country if we're not careful, and they are an inherent threat to democracy." And you haven't heard much about that since. And in this year's presidential campaign, every single candidate favors increasing the defense budget.
And why is that?
Because if you don't, you'll be accused of being weak.
Now Edwards is not making that case for increasing the military budget, is he?
I believe that he calls for some increase.
Kucinich is definitely not.
Yeah, but Kucinich is an asterisk.
Well, what happened to Kucinich is basically what happened to Nader as far as these debates go.
Wait a minute. Let me stop on a minute here. Kucinich is an asterisk. What does that mean?
That
means the corporate media has no time at all for him.
But he's also he's run a lousy campaign. He hasn't deserved to be really any higher than he is because he hasn't carried the message around and done the work that one should do. I think basically he's a vanity candidate, and I'm kind of angry at him.
So am I.
I can tell.
But there needs to be someone who's telling the truth out there.
Well, I agree. I think
we need to support him as best we can, so at least he may have some influence on the Democratic Party's plank.
Well, look what he did last time.
What do you do? Just abandon and roll over, for God's sake?
I don't want to spend too much time on this, but last time the Democrats who came to the convention.
He said he was going to go the distance. He was going to fight it in the convention, and he caved at the end.
He went to the convention. And the convention, 90% of the people at the convention were proud to announce that they wanted out of Iraq right now. This is in 2004. Kerry promised to send 40,000 more troops and win the war. And so, and Kucinich said he would take the battle to the floor. He was going to fight for a peace plank in the Democratic platform. He got there and he said, "I don't want the progressives to be blamed for splitting the party," and he chickened out. And
then look what he did in Iowa. He basically threw support to Obama.
Yeah.
I couldn't believe it.
Yeah.
So where do I go then? He is the only candidate and on both sides who seem to be straight up and telling the truth about everything. What do I do now? What do my viewers do out there?
I think at this point,
what do we do?
At this point, one should support Obama because he may turn out better than expected, and I don't see anybody else with a chance to be president for whom that is true.
What do you think?
I cannot throw my support to Obama without understanding where Obama's really coming from. And really, it's one thing to get up and make wonderful speeches and talk about change. It's another thing to do like Edwards and outline exactly how that change is supposed to work.
I agree. But
I'd support Nader again.
Well, me too if he runs.
Right.
But in the meantime, it's, you know, for people who are going to participate in the Democratic Party, the better choice. Hillary is mobbed up with corporate money to the gills.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
I mean, she's an unacceptable
But unfortunately,
candidate.
Obama's starting to look the same way.
Obama has a ton of small money as well as a large amount of corporate money, and that is one distinction. He has some very bad votes in his history, but he's taken some good positions at some times, and he's not a fool.
What can the viewers do for this predicament we're in now? The people who are running, none of them, except Kucinich, are straight up, and you say he's been caving here and there, so we expect him to cave again.
Well, I don't. I would
do?
take exception to your statement that except for Kucinich, none of them are straight up. I think Edwards is being straight up.
I think
Let
so.
me challenge you on that. Doesn't he propose health care that somehow has the insurance industry still involved?
Well, I think Greg said it best.
If you get that little
Edwards
tiny
is
bit of
not
poison.
perfect.
Right.
He's not perfect.
All right.
But I believe he's being straight up.
What he
I
said-
mean, no one is talking the corporate message like he's talking it now. You know, as far as the so-called front runners.
What Edwards has said is that we'll have basically a Medicare-style system which people can take, you know, a government system or a private system, and which will not be allowed. The private system will not be allowed to cherry pick, to say we'll take you because you're healthy and you can't come in because you don't look so hot. And he says that since the private system has all manner of huge inefficiencies built into it that basic Medicare doesn't. You know, you're paying people to sit on telephones and say, "Are you going to cover this?" And people on the other end saying, "No, we're not," right? You know, it's all wasted money and effort. Because he feels that the private system is inefficient, he thinks that we may get to single payer by competition in that manner. That's his answer. Now, you know, he doesn't. It's not a point of view that should be taken trivially.
Who's going to win on Super Tuesday? Who's going to get the Democratic Party nomination?
Oh boy.
You know, I can't. I'm not the prophet here.
Who do you want to see get it?
Oh my God.
Hillary?
No, I don't want to see Hillary get it. I really don't. I mean, I agree with you. It would be wonderful if Kucinich, who now has a pretty poor track record about going to the end like he says he's going to go, it'd be wonderful to see somebody like him there who would be willing to make the systemic changes that need to happen. And there's only a few people I can think of that would do that. Nader would obviously do it.
How about Gore?
Oh, I don't think I have no you know, I have no enamored desire to see Gore run for
Let it not be
president.
forgot who he picked as his vice president. He's seen,
Yeah,
you know, as
really.
the golden
Oh
boy
my
now.
God.
He picked Lieberman to be his vice president,
Right.
who was a corporate whore unmatched in
Absolutely.
Washington.
Family show.
Insurance and
Family
private.
show,
Yes.
and you know, a dreadful person in every regard, frankly.
I'm getting depressed. You
Well,
guys are not helping.
Let me cheer you up. Now, let me cheer you up.
Sure.
Ralph Nader, who Lloyd and I have supported throughout the years, and
So have I.
we're friends of his. He has promoted the point of view that there's a common thread, that corporate power is at the core of all the problems, that everything flows from that.
Hartman
People
does
not
the
having,
same thing.
Yeah, and
Corporate personhood.
but Nader's done it in a political context.
That's right.
He's taken enormous heat for it, suffered enormous abuse for it. But in the last election in 2006, you had a number of Democratic senators, probably half a dozen, who came in on a pretty anti-corporate line, pretty much saying what Nader was saying. And you know, Jim Webb and Tester from North Dakota and so on. And this is a tremendous breakthrough. And then you had Edwards carrying the issue into the presidential
that's right.
campaign.
The
This
message
is a big deal.
is starting to be carried politically.
The message is
That's
starting to
right.
be carried politically. And look at Edwards. He may not be making it, but he has an 80% favorability rating among Democrats. It's not that they're rejecting his message. It's just that the others are, you know, sexier candidates. Can I say that on the air?
And the media, how they're presenting these characters, all right?
Absolutely.
So, in the interest of covering the Republicans too, what do you think about the Republican race? Huckabee is
What's
a
there to think
populist. Yeah, but the viewers out there,
Fear, terror.
We have
Huckabee's
viewers
different.
out there who are conservative,
Well, Huckabee's-
liberal, and Republicans
Huckabee's
and
kinda like
Democrats.
you know, a country approach to it, a rural approach
Well,
to it.
here's what's happening with
And
the.
you're laughing.
It's like Mayberry.
Okay.
Well,
so
he's-
that's not fair.
No, he's
if I may,
he's
all
a
right?
very-
Because there are people out there who like Huckabee because he's a populist in his own right.
I understand that. I understand that. But the
Give him his
problem is
due.
the problem though is that I think he will do great harm. I really do.
Well,
I don't want to see him in there.
Neither do I. Yeah.
he might. On the other hand, he's an interesting character.
He is a character.
Now, you know, his background is a little spotty. He never met a freebie he didn't like, and, and so on.
yeah, that's right.
You
I've
know,
heard about that.
It's a little.
You
it's-
guys,
well,
politicians.
Well, no, it is. It's in Arkansas.
When he
they have that perception of him.
when he left office, he and his wife registered as if they'd just gotten married, although they'd been married for 30 years, and accepted tons of presents from people who wanted to give them things, and so on. But I mean, these are you know, everybody knew about it.
Right.
They elected him. But he. The Republican Party has always been a corporate party, and it uses these religious conservatives as the foot soldiers, and it keeps saying to them, "Oh,
Right.
we're against abortion, and we're gonna work on that for you. You know, go out and lick envelopes and knock on doors, and you be our grunts." And they do, just as obediently as they can. They say, "We're part of the Republican coalition." You know, they don't realize they're being played for fools,
Oh, right.
because they never really get anything out of it. And in fact, the Republicans' corporate policies crush these people. They keep their kids from going to college. They keep their kids from getting their teeth fixed. I mean, they keep them from having decent jobs, and yet they keep thinking of themselves, you know, yeah, we're good Republicans. Well, but what's happened now is that the inmates have rebelled, and they're taking over.
And one of their own.
Yeah, and
one of
this
their
guy doesn't give a damn about Wall Street, and he says so. He complains about corporate greed. He talks about how the government ought to recognize, you know, that the least among us are the ones who need help. And he's reaching into some of these serious Christian themes that all the phony Christian preacher types never talk about. I mean, they're talking about how you can get rich.
Damn, Greg, I didn't know you were a closet Huckabee supporter.
Well,
This is pretty amazing.
Huckabee,
Uncovered something here. Keep going.
You have.
Huckabee
The truth is out.
Huckabee is an interesting phenomenon because he's driving a wedge into the heart of the Republican Party, and Wall Street is frantic, doesn't know where it's going to go. Now you're
Right.
seeing talk about a Bloomberg
Well,
race.
maybe it could
You
be
know?
right. I don't know.
What would happen if Huckabee?
I'm so soured on Republicans. I mean,
what would happen if Huckabee managed to be elected president of the United States of America? What would happen to our country? What would happen to the Middle East and what's going on?
Well, Lloyd and I would have to start believing in creationism.
that's true. Evolution
And,
would be out.
Well, I'll tell you that his foreign policy on his website, so I'm told, if you go to foreign policy, it says foreign policy / Israel.
There it is.
Which is another subject,
There it
you
is.
know. But that's all his only foreign policy.
That's why I think he's dangerous.
It's
I
the one you
really
have
do.
to have. The one every politician has to kiss the feet of AIPAC, the American Israeli Political Action Committee, which is taking Israel down by driving the American policy into an anti-peace policy. And you know, in the long run, Israel's surrounded by a lot of people who don't like it very much, and they better make peace while they can. But AIPAC is
All you
pushing
got to
them in the
do is
opposite
read
direction.
just about anything that's coming out of Chris Hedges, and it really reveals it.
You bet. So Israel, I heard someplace has 400 to 600 nuclear weapons now.
Right.
What's going to happen with those nuclear weapons
Well,
in
I
the
want
next
to do my
10, 20
pitch.
Yes,
I want to do my
yes,
pitch
please.
because I think this book is very important for people to read. The Seventh Decade.
Hold
The
it up
New
so he
Shape
can
Hold
get
of
it.
it.
Nuclear Danger by Jonathan Schell. I just finished this book. Jonathan Schell has done a wonderful job of depicting the historic evolution of nuclear weapons since, you know, World War II, and has made a very good analysis of the Bush administration's manipulation of this whole effort that was made before Bush to try and, through the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, to get ourselves out from underneath nuclear weapons, and it in fact has reversed it and makes a wonderful case for the abolition of nuclear weapons. And you know, we live in a time of great crisis, and a lot of it's brought about by Pakistan, which has proliferated nuclear weapons to a huge extent.
With basic American approval, thanks
Yes.
to Mrs. Bhutto, this saint.
Yeah, and also, well,
are so
Musharraf
good.
has been in there too, you know. So
Oh, I
it's
know.
it's all part and parcel of the same thing, and you know, what we're looking at here is another inconvenient truth.
Yeah.
And if we don't attempt to do what was intended by the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, which is to abolish nuclear weapons on the planet, we are heading down the road of what we've got now, basically, which is terrorists who are attempting to pick up on the technology that now has been distributed. You know, one of the things that was revealing in this book to me was, you know, I always thought that the Atoms for Peace program was something that was good, and that was part of the propaganda.
Sure.
Eisenhower was pushing Atoms for Peace, and why? Because it was the only way to get the have-nots, which is the nations that do not have nuclear weapons, to allow the haves to continue to produce them. We have 27,000 nuclear weapons on the planet. We have not destroyed the weapons we've got now. Bush entered into a treaty which stands down the nuclear missiles that are prepared to hit anything. Russia's supposed to have 2,000, we're supposed to have 2,000. But the fact of the matter is the overwhelming bulk of the missiles are not destroyed. They're sitting on standby.
Oh, sure.
I mean, it's just craziness. It's absolute craziness. And you know, it's ironic because I think a lot of people thought when the Freeze campaign was going on and Reagan was finally reaching the point where he wanted to abolish nuclear weapons, that somehow we won the day. We didn't win a thing. We're just as bad as we were before.
And worse, because you have the non-state actors.
I highly recommend this book. Highly recommend it. Please get it.
I'm aware of our time running down, and I want us to have some sort of a summary message for the viewers out there based on the title of this show, 2008 Presidential Race, and what we've been talking about. That would be useful for them to have things go in the way that's going to be beneficial to our country, to our society, to our culture, and to humankind in general. What kind of message can you give to our viewers out there that would be useful?
I would say that you have short-term, medium-term, long-term.
Okay.
In the short term, I think in the unlikely event that the presidential race gets to Oregon, you know, it's not over by then. And of course, you know, you can give money now, or you can, you know, do as Judy and I did and go somewhere and work for somebody. I think Obama is the logical choice because we don't know that he's a villain, and he might be a good guy who's done some unfortunate things. He's extremely smart, extremely able, and he seems to have a great deal of personal confidence. He's not somebody who's drawn into politics out of weakness or venality, and I think he's the best bet in the short term. In the longer term, we need to press our candidates to on what their stand is on corporate power, because that's the central element, and will be the central element for a long time to come.
Press our candidates. How do we press our candidates?
You know, you write to them when they come to speak. You go hear them. You question them. You know, you get on call-in radio shows, TV shows. You make your voice heard, because there is a common thread to all our problems. Then it's corporate domination, and that has to be broken. The grip has to be broken. And lastly, keep an eye on what Nader is doing, because I know he's highly interested in developing a mass group which will be used to pressure the next president, whoever that may be, into keeping their promises and perhaps expanding on them.
Lloyd, couple minutes.
Well, the theme is a bit similar. I believe that we need to decorporatize democracy. That's number one. Number two, I think that we need to demand accountability, and not just from the candidates, but for all public officials, people that represent us. And finally, my message would be in the form of this quote by Homer Lee: "To free a nation from error is to enlighten the individual, and it is only to the degree that an individual is receptive of the truth that a nation can be free from that vanity which ends in national ruin.
Yes.
Lloyd's always a downer. I've tried to get him off.
That's an upper. That's an upper. God, Greg. You've got Obama stars in your eyes.
I have.
He's an interesting guy, and
I think he is an interesting guy, and I'm not discounting him, but I must say, I don't think we know enough, and I'm concerned.
Yeah,
and
but we're not ready.
And not only that, I think we got to be careful about falling into these personality cults, because systemically we need to make change.
Oh,
here.
absolutely.
We really do. And if Obama's not going to deliver it, by God, we've got to get it by hook or by crook.
Well, our mission doesn't change whether Obama gets it or not, and that's to keep the struggle going.
There are people who are suggesting that the kind of things we're talking about and your suggestions on what we can do, doing something, have not worked with this kind of a neo-fascist government. The only thing that ultimately works with these kinds of situations is when you shut down the system, okay?
Right.
It's when you take to the streets.
Right.
It's what we did in the Vietnam era. It's what they've done in in Hugo Chavez's Venezuela.
I don't in any way disagree with you.
And ultimately, we're going to have to shut it down, whatever it takes. And this act you're talking about is going to have to go into force, and we may end up in jail again. I haven't been in jail. So we're going to have to do something other than what we've been doing.
They're preparing the jails for us. That's what is really scary about this.
It really is true. It's quite remarkable.
Right. And I think there has to be huge pressure on Congress. I don't know how we're going to do it, to do impeachment. If we don't reverse this congregation of power in the hands of the executive, we're finished.
Well, one thing we should do is when these two-bit congressmen come to town with their little brother to the House Un-American Activities Committee and want to start subpoenaing people.
Yes.
People should surround the buildings and block them in. And
Absolutely.
Not, get real unpleasant about it, so they decide, you know what, this is not such a good idea. That would be a start.
Greg, you and I together.
We are not revolutionaries and no violent overthrowing of the government. We're patriotic Americans in our own ways, so if you come for us, you have to create some legitimate reason to come for us. So if I'm speaking for all of us, all right. Now, it's close to time to stop. I've only got a couple minutes left. Keep your pens and pencils handy, because you may want to jot down something that we'll show you in the closing credits. I invite you to give us feedback, both positive and negative, about any aspect of the show. And my email address is friendlydon@aol.com. Yes. For you real late tuners in, Conversations with Dr. Don is an ongoing series of 1-hour standalone talk shows where I interview interesting people like most of you out there, not quite as interesting as these two characters here, about who they are as unique, one-of-a-kind individuals and whatever it is that they want to talk about. Luckily, I wanted to talk about the presidential race, and they wanted to too. And we went all over the place, and I think we've done a good job as far as I'm concerned. Public service announcements. Alliance for Democracy. I want to tell you about the Alliance for Democracy. That's an organization that's a national organization, and the local chapter is working diligently to do the kind of things that we think need to be done to take back our country. There's a website, and the Portland chapter, give David Delk a call, 503-232-5495. Wonderful guy who works very, very hard to save our democracy here. And the next I want to tell you about the ACLU, the American Civil Liberties Union. There's a national office. And I want to tell you about the ACLU hotline. For those of you out there who think you may have been stopped by law enforcement because of how you look, or you may look like an Arab or something, then call that hotline, because we need to know about that. The ACLU is a wonderful organization that protects our civil liberties that are slowly being threatened by the present administration. The American Humanist Association is the next public service announcement. There's a national headquarters. I'm a humanist from a long time ago. And the local chapter of the AHA, we meet every Sunday morning like regular church folk here in Portland at Friendly House. There's the address and the website and the phone number. We have wonderful programs every Sunday morning. Put the list up of programs we have. We don't have much time, but that's what we talk about on Sunday mornings. So I want to say a big thank you for tuning in to the people who are watching in other parts of the country. And we have 1 minute left. And especially you folks in Seattle, Washington, who get a chance to watch this, and the ones in New Hampshire too, and of course in Salem. I want to thank my guests again for coming on. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And remember, you know what's coming. Dr. Don's motto, KFC. Not the Colonel's KFC, but Dr. Don's KFC. Kind, friendly, and charitable. Be kind. Be friendly. And be charitable to you too. Especially you. And you. And you. And you. Thanks again.